Back at Smutty Nose, our hop-heavy double IPA is halfway through the brewing process. We started with the barley and filtered it into this sugary liquid called wort. It's all been transferred to a massive kettle, heated up until it's ready for our key ingredient.
Now importing the hops for the big egg.
These hops boil for about 90 minutes straight.
There we go.
And this is where the magic happens, when the hops release their flavor and aroma-producing oils into the beer.
Now it's bubbling.
You can see the hops floating up to the top and then getting sucked back down. This looks like the surface of an alien planet. Ow!
That's why you don't want to be looking at it.
But there's one final touch needed to turn this bubbling boil into beer. Water and barley form the base. Hops round out the flavor. But where does the buzz come from?
So what's next?
The next ingredient is yeast. Here's a jar of yeast that we've sort of collected.
Yum! That's right, ladies and gentlemen. That long-awaited guest of honor that spikes the beer bowl. Yeast. A single-celled fungus with an unquenchable sweet tooth. Inside the fermenter, yeast consumes the sugary wort, releasing two byproducts in the process, carbon dioxide and alcohol. Once the yeast finishes fermenting, the brewer filters it off so it can be used again for future batches. The final product, a fermented beverage for the ages, beer.
As far as history goes, for years they didn't know what the hell yeast was. You know, the microscope wasn't invented, so a lot of times they do the process of making their beer, and it wouldn't come out because there wasn't any yeast in there. And then they figured they'd take a little of the beer that they had made previously and they would add it to what they were doing then. It wasn't until, I want to say, the 1300s that a brewery called Carlsberg, which we can get here, he discovered yeast. It's actually, the name of it is Carlsbergenius or something silly, is the main yeast strain. The other thing he doesn't get into here is each brewery, they have their own yeast, and they keep it locked up, basically, because that's what makes their beer taste unique. There are companies for home brewers. I don't know if anybody's ever done any home brewing, but there are companies now that you can get, Labatt's yeast, you can get Sam Adams yeast, because they've, reverse engineered to get to that point. But for the most part, you can process a beer the exact same way, use all the exact same ingredients, but use two different yeast strains, and you'll have two different beers that are going to taste different. He doesn't really get into that here, but it's a unique property that yeast, they're all unique. We're all unique individuals just like us.
The guy behind me, they actually call him the beast. He's the best one here. He can go like this for hours.
Obviously in the big companies, this is all automated, but in the microbreweries, you got some guy that does this by hand.
In the big picture of beer making, you have your huge brewers, and then of course, your craft brewers. The 1,400 craft brewers in the US, like Smutty Nose, make up the fastest growing segment of the beer industry. While the craft brewers are the perfect size to see how beer is made, you have to go even smaller to really see how brewing beer is being transformed into an art. It's happening well out of the spotlight. If the ongoing hops crisis forces craft brewers to close shop,
has anybody ever tried to make their own beer?
Beer as an art form may lie in your neighbor's basement.
It is simple, but it's difficult to make a good beer, and then it's even more difficult to make that same good beer again. Just a little change can screw it up.
Here's my home brewery.
Now this guy's clearly a nut. If I had a room like this in my house, I'd have a lot more time to do these kind of discussions because I wouldn't be married. You can do a home brew with pretty much a big pot to boil water and what's called a pour boy, which is just a big container. You don't have to be this crazy, or this dedicated, I should say. I've brewed a bunch of my own beer, and I like to cook, but I don't like to cook my own beer because I can't come close to what's out there, so I don't try.
And freshly grated coconut, which I've also toasted. The play between the chocolate and the coconut, I think, is going to be a really great flavor.
There are whole clubs and everything that you can join, home brewers associations. These guys meet all the time. They taste each other's beers. It's a tight-knit club.
I've never seen a chocolate coconut beer before, and one of the beauties about homebrewing is that we can make different flavors that you can't really find on the open market. So if I want to taste something like this, I have to make it myself.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, if there's you really have a craving for some kind of beer flavor that you can't find in the market, I guess this is your only way to do it. But it can be a lot of work to do it the right way.
And remember how the Pilgrims went AWOL when they ran out of beer? They weren't just missing their favorite ale. Vitamin-rich beer was like food on long voyages. So when the beer ran out, they were starving.
I don't have a Bach here that we're going to taste, but he had mentioned about the monks in the monasteries and that. Well, when they go fasting for 40 days, they're drinking this heavily fortified beer. There was doubles and triples, and that's what they actually lived on. There was a program. This guy actually lived on Guinness for, I think it was 7 days or 2 weeks or something like that. That's all he did was Guinness. He actually tried to freeze it, made freezy pops and stuff out of it, but he did it, and he had no ill health effects or anything. I'm not suggesting you guys try this, by the way, but beer was actually there are a lot of vitamins in there. You can sustain life, and that's what these monks did. So these monks really propelled the brewing industry into what it is today. Because without them having nothing else to do but to read that one book and figure out the beer, they really propelled us.
Today, some chefs are cooking up a full diet of beer. Beer infuses 90% of the dishes at the Public House Pub.
I can feel the heat coming off of this thing.
It was special on the menu, so roasted elk chop.
Roasted elk chop?
Roasted elk, that's right.
Okay.
Got any elk chops in there?
Some cherries. Right
Got any elk chops in there? We can try this.
And the beer. A lot of cups worth, so that's perfect. Give me any ideas.
Those are just going to soak in the beer a little bit and absorb some of the flavor?
Absorb some of the flavor.
You could do a whole curriculum on beer cuisine, cooking with beer. There's a lot of books out there. There's a lot of different things you can do with it. Just like cooking with wine, you can cook with beer.
What I think is going to go best with.
Cooking with beer may seem odd now, but the fact that it could carry so many different ingredients and tastes made it indispensable. Perfect. Scientists have isolated 1,000 identifiable flavors in beer. More than even wine. Let's put those flavors to the test on a beer tasting obstacle course.
Dark Belgian. It's a little sweet, made with Belgian candy sugar.
Yeah, I can taste that. It tastes like candy.
Sour brown with cherries. Gets the glands going.
This one is